It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when I decided to stop by my friend Mark's house to drop off a package he had asked me to hold for him earlier in the week. And since his neighborhood was only about 10 minutes from my apartment, I figured it would be a quick errand before heading home. So I drove through the familiar suburban streets, lined with neatly trimmed lawns, evenly spaced houses, and the occasional parked car along the curb. The kind of peaceful residential area where everything usually feels predictable and uneventful, and where most people expect a simple visit to a friend's house to pass without the slightest hint of drama. As I turned onto Mark Street, I noticed that several driveways were already full of cars, which wasn't unusual because most of the families in that neighborhood own multiple vehicles and often parked one or two along the curb. So instead of blocking anyone's driveway or squeezing into a tight space, I looked for an open stretch of road where parking would be perfectly legal and convenient, eventually spotting a clear section of curb about 3 houses down from Mark's place, where there was plenty of room to pull over safely without interfering with traffic or access to anyone's property. The spot where I parked happened to be near a standard black mailbox, mounted on a wooden post beside the sidewalk. But since my car wasn't touching the mailbox and there was still several feet of space between the front of my bumper and the post itself, I didn't think twice about it, because on residential streets like that, it's common to park near mailboxes as long as you leave enough room for the mail carrier to reach them. So I turned off the engine, grabbed the small package from the passenger seat, and stepped out of the car expecting to be gone for no more than a minute or two. As I closed the car door and started walking toward Mark's house, I noticed a woman standing on the porch of the house closest to where I had parked, watching me with the kind of intense stare that immediately makes you aware someone is paying very close attention to your presence. And although it caught me slightly off guard, I assumed she was simply curious about a stranger parking on her street, which is a fairly normal reaction in neighborhoods where most residents recognize the cars that usually belong there. I gave her a polite nod as I passed the edge of her yard and continued toward the sidewalk leading down the block. But before I had taken more than a few steps, I heard her voice call out sharply from behind me with a tone that carried a noticeable edge of irritation. And when I turned around, I saw that she had already stepped off her porch and was walking toward me quickly, her posture rigid and her expression tense in a way that suggested she had already decided there was a problem before even explaining what she thought I had done wrong. When she reached the sidewalk, she pointed directly toward my car and asked in a demanding tone whether I had just parked next to her mailbox. And although the question itself seemed simple enough, the intensity in her voice made it feel more like an accusation than a normal inquiry. So I glanced back at the car and calmly confirmed that yes, I had parked there temporarily because I was dropping off a package at my friend's house a few doors down and would be leaving again almost immediately. Instead of accepting that explanation, she crossed her arms tightly and said that I could not park there because that was her mailbox, delivering the statement with such certainty that it sounded as if she believed the space beside the curb belonged exclusively to her. And although I tried to remain polite, I couldn't help feeling confused by the logic of her complaint, since the street itself was clearly public property and my car wasn't blocking access to the mailbox at all. I explained as calmly as possible that there was still plenty of room for a mail truck to reach the mailbox and that I would only be gone for a couple of minutes anyway. But she shook her head firmly and insisted that I needed to move my car immediately, repeating her demand with increasing frustration as though the mere presence of my vehicle in that spot was somehow a personal offense rather than a completely ordinary parking situation on a residential street. At that point, I tried to reassure her that I meant no disrespect and that the errand would take less than 2 minutes. But instead of acknowledging the explanation, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone while announcing that if I didn't move the car right away, she was going to call the police, a statement so extreme that for a brief moment I actually thought she was joking, because the idea of contacting law enforcement over a legally parked car seemed almost absurd. When she immediately began dialing and speaking loudly into the phone, describing the situation to the dispatcher as if someone were intentionally blocking her mailbox and refusing to cooperate, I realized that she was completely serious about escalating the situation, which left me standing there in disbelief while she explained that a stranger had parked next to her mailbox and would not move the vehicle despite being told to leave. Rather than stand there arguing while she spoke to the dispatcher, I decided the most sensible thing to do was simply finish the errand quickly. So I walked down the block to Mark's house and rang the doorbell while holding the small package under my arm. And when he opened the door, I briefly explained that his neighbor had apparently called the police because of where I parked, a statement that caused him to laugh almost immediately as if he had heard the same story before. Mark leaned against the doorframe with an amused expression and asked whether the woman had blonde hair and a very serious attitude. And when I confirmed that description, he nodded knowingly and told me that her name was Linda and that she had a reputation in the neighborhood for overreacting to minor inconveniences, including once calling the police because someone parked too close to her recycling bin on trash collection day. After handing him the package and sharing a quick laugh about the situation, I walked back toward my car expecting the whole incident to fade away before the police even arrived. But when I reached the curb, I saw that the woman was still standing beside the mailbox with her arms folded tightly, watching the car with the same intense focus as if she were guarding it from further intrusion. When she noticed me returning, she informed me that she had already told the dispatcher that I refused to move the car. And although I calmly reminded her that I had simply said I would be gone in a minute, she responded by saying that the police were already on their way, delivering the statement with a tone of stubborn satisfaction that suggested she believed the situation would soon prove her right. About 10 minutes later, a police cruiser slowly rolled down the street and stopped near the curb, drawing the attention of a few curious neighbors who peeked through their windows or stepped onto their porches to see what was happening. And when the two officers stepped out of the car, they approached with the calm but slightly puzzled expressions of people who suspected the call they had received might involve something far less dramatic than it had sounded over the phone. The woman immediately pointed toward my car and explained that I had parked next to her mailbox and refused to move despite being told to do so. But when one of the officers walked over to examine the distance between the car and the mailbox, he quickly noticed that there was several feet of space available, which meant the mailbox was clearly accessible and that no traffic or delivery service was being obstructed in any way. After briefly confirming that the street was public property and that parking along the curb in that location was perfectly legal, as long as access to the mailbox remained available, the officer calmly explained to the woman that no law had been broken and that there was no reason to involve emergency services in a situation like this, while I quietly thanked them for their time and started my car, pulling away from the curb with a final glance in the rearview mirror at the woman still standing beside her mailbox, looking frustrated that the dramatic confrontation she had expected had turned out to be nothing more than an ordinary parking stop.